They called me the disappointment daughter, not behind closed doors, not in whispered arguments when they thought I wasn't listening. No, they said it right to my face at dinner tables, at family gatherings, in the middle of the country club where everyone could pretend not to hear. My name is Amelia White, and for 26 years, I was the daughter who didn't matter. My sister Meredith was the golden child, Yale Law, top of her class. Internships at firms that had names you'd recognize from corporate scandals and Supreme Court briefs. She wore pearls like armor and spoke in the kind of polished sentences that made my parents' friends nod with approval. I wore boots covered in mud and talked about soil composition. You can imagine which one of us got the applause. Growing up, I learned to make myself small. I learned that my excitement didn't belong at the dinner table, that my interests were tolerated but never celebrated, that love in my family was conditional and I had failed to meet the conditions. When Meredith got into Yale, my father opened a bottle of champagne that cost more than my monthly allowance. When I got into UC Davis for agricultural science, my mother sighed and said, "Well, at least it's still a UC, at least." Those two words became the soundtrack of my childhood. At least she got into college. At least she's doing something. At least she's not completely useless. I stopped trying to make them proud somewhere around sophomore year. I stopped showing up to family dinners with stories about my research. I stopped expecting them to ask about my life. I poured everything into my work instead. Agricultural technology became my language when my family stopped listening. While Meredith argued cases in mock trials, I spent nights in the lab developing sensors that could detect soil moisture levels with terrifying accuracy, while she networked at galas. I buried my hands in dirt and data, building algorithms that could predict crop yields based on dozens of microvariables most farmers never even considered. My parents thought I was playing in the dirt. I was building something they couldn't see yet. After graduation, I started TerraSense in a garage I rented for $300 a month in Fresno. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't a story my mother could brag about at brunch, but it was mine. The first prototype was a disaster. I installed sensor arrays across a mid-sized farm in the Central Valley, promising real-time data that would revolutionize their irrigation strategy. The farmer, a kind man named Joe Reyes, believed in me when no one else did. 3 weeks in, the entire system failed. Not gradually, not with warning signs I could troubleshoot. It just died, right before a critical watering cycle. And Joe lost 15% of his yield that quarter. I refunded every penny he'd paid me. I apologized until my voice went hoarse. I sat in my car outside that farm and cried so hard I thought I'd crack a rib. My parents heard about it. Of course, small industries talk. And the agricultural world in California is smaller than you'd think. My father called it the nail in the coffin of your little hobby. My mother suggested I consider going back to school for something practical. Meredith sent a text that said, "Maybe this is a sign you should try something else." None of them asked if I was okay. I spent the next 4 months tearing apart every line of code, every sensor calibration, every assumption I'd made. I stopped sleeping regular hours. I lived on coffee and spite and the kind of desperate determination that only comes from having nothing left to lose. And then I found it. The failure wasn't random. It was a pattern, hidden so deep in the data I'd missed it the first 100 times. Environmental electromagnetic interference from nearby equipment was creating microdisruptions in the sensor network, corruptions so small they seemed like noise until they compounded. But if I could detect the pattern, I could predict it, and if I could predict it, I could build around it. I didn't just fix the bug, I turned it into a feature. The new algorithm didn't just monitor soil conditions, it adapted in real time to environmental interference, self-corrected sensor drift, and integrated weather data to predict optimal watering schedules 3 days in advance. I rebuilt the system from the ground up, installed it on a farm half the size of Joe's, and watched it work flawlessly for 6 months straight. Water usage dropped by 32%. Yield increased by 18%. The farmer told everyone he knew, and people started calling. Within a year, TerraSense had 12 clients across California and Arizona. Within 18 months, we had venture capital firms asking for meetings. Within 2 years, I had a team of 6 engineers, a patent pending on the adaptive algorithm, and interest from some of the biggest agricultural corporations in the country. I didn't tell my parents any of this. I stopped giving them ammunition a long time ago. Instead, I let them believe what they wanted to believe, that I was struggling, barely scraping by. Wasting my degree on a pipe dream that would never pay off. They were so convinced of my failure, they stopped asking questions. That was their first mistake. By the time I turned 26, AgriCorp, one of the largest agricultural technology firms in North America, had been in quiet negotiations with me for months. They wanted the algorithm, they wanted the team, they wanted me. The offer was staggering: $8.5 million for full acquisition of TerraSense, plus a director-level position in their R&D division based in Chicago, with a salary that made my parents' country club memberships look like pocket change. I was in the final stages of due diligence, days away from signing, when my parents decided to stage an intervention, not because they cared. Because I was an embarrassment they'd finally decided to remove. Part 1 word count, 1,000 words. Part 2. The intervention happened on a Saturday afternoon in May, at the country club my parents treated like a second home. They'd called me that morning with unusual urgency. My mother's voice had that tight, clipped quality that meant she was performing for an audience, even over the phone. "Amelia, we need to see you today, it's important, 2 o'clock at the club. Don't be late." I almost said no. I had a conference call with AgriCorp's legal team scheduled for Monday and a dozen documents to review, but something in her tone made me curious. I showed up in jeans and a blazer, the closest thing I owned to country club appropriate. They were waiting in one of the private dining rooms, the kind with heavy curtains and oil paintings of dead rich men on the walls. My father sat at the head of the table like he was chairing a board meeting. My mother perched beside him, spine straight, hands folded. Meredith was there too, looking uncomfortable in a way that almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. "Sit down, Amelia," my father said, gesturing to the chair across from him like I was a defendant. I sat. My mother slid an envelope across the table. "We've been talking," she began, "and we've decided it's time for some tough love." I stared at the envelope. It was cream-colored, expensive stationery. The kind my mother used for thank you notes to people she didn't actually want to thank. "You're 26 years old," my father continued, "and you're still chasing this farming thing. It's been years, Amelia, years of failure and wasted potential. Your mother and I didn't raise you to dig in the dirt for the rest of your life. We've watched you struggle," my mother added, her voice dripping with performative concern. "We've watched you pour money into a business that's never going to succeed. And we can't keep enabling this." Meredith wouldn't look at me. "Open the envelope," my father said. I did. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Austin, Texas, dated for 2 weeks from that day. Underneath it was a check for $5,000. "We think you need a fresh start," my mother said. "Austin has a good tech scene. Maybe you can find a real job there, something stable. The check is to help you get settled." I looked at the ticket, at the check, at my parents' faces, so certain they were doing the right thing. "You're sending me away," I said quietly. "We're giving you an opportunity," my father corrected. "A chance to stop embarrassing yourself and this family." "Embarrassing you? Don't make this harder than it needs to be," my mother said. "You've tried, Amelia, you've tried for years, and it hasn't worked. Sometimes you have to accept that you're not cut out for entrepreneurship." I could have told them. Right then, I could have pulled up the acquisition agreement on my phone and watched their faces collapse. I could have shoved every condescending word back down their throats. But I didn't. Because letting them believe they'd won was going to make what came next so much sweeter. "Okay," I said. My mother blinked. Okay, I'll go to Austin." My father looked surprised, then relieved, then almost disappointed that I hadn't fought back. He'd probably been looking forward to the argument. "Good," he said, recovering quickly. "This is the right decision, Amelia, you'll see." I folded the check and the ticket back into the envelope and stood up. "Thank you for lunch," I said, even though no one had ordered food. I walked out of that country club with my head high and my hands steady, and I didn't look back. 3 days later, I signed the acquisition agreement with AgriCorp. The wire transfer hit my account on a Wednesday morning. $8.5 million, minus taxes and legal fees. But still enough to make my banking app glitch when I opened it. I stared at the number until it stopped feeling real and started feeling like vindication. AgriCorp wanted to announce the acquisition with a press release and a feature in Forbes 30 Under 30 in AgTech list I'd been quietly nominated for months earlier. Stanford's alumni magazine wanted to do a profile, even though I'd gone to Davis. They were covering UC system innovators. The trade publications were already writing headlines. I approved it all. I didn't warn my parents. The Forbes article went live on a Thursday morning. By noon, it had been shared across LinkedIn, picked up by tech newsletters, and reposted by every agricultural industry group on the West Coast. Amelia White, 26, sells AgTech startup TerraSense to AgriCorps for $8.5 million. Pioneering adaptive sensor technology set to transform precision agriculture. The article included photos from the press conference, me shaking hands with AgriCorps CEO, me standing in front of a sensor array in a sunlit field, me smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in years. It included quotes from venture capital firms that had tried to invest earlier. It outlined the technology in language that made it sound exactly as revolutionary as it was. It mentioned my upcoming director role in Chicago. It mentioned my alma mater. It did not mention my parents. But their friends saw it anyway. My phone started buzzing around 2 in the afternoon. Texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Emails from former classmates. A voicemail from my college advisor, voice cracking with pride. And then, finally, a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. My father sent a text. We need to talk. Call me immediately. Meredith sent. What the hell, Amelia? I blocked all 3 of them and went to dinner with my team to celebrate. We rented out a small restaurant in Fresno. The kind of place that serves family style and doesn't care if you're loud. My lead engineer gave a toast that made me cry. My project manager printed out the Forbes article and made everyone sign it like a yearbook. Joe Reyes, the farmer whose field had failed 2 years earlier, showed up with a bottle of champagne and a grin so wide it looked painful. I knew you'd figure it out, he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like soil and diesel. I knew it. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, my parents showed up at my apartment. Part to word count. 1007 words. Part 3. I didn't answer the door. I was packing boxes in my bedroom when I heard the knocking, aggressive and insistent. Then my mother's voice, sharp enough to cut through the walls. Amelia, open this door right now. I kept packing. We know you're in there, my father shouted. We saw your car. I folded another shirt, placed it carefully in the box, and said nothing. They knocked for 10 more minutes before they finally left. The emails started that afternoon. My father's was titled Family Discussion Required and contained 3 paragraphs of thinly veiled legal threats about how the $5,000 check they'd given me constituted seed funding and they were entitled to a percentage of the acquisition as early investors. My mother's was worse, a rambling guilt trip about how much they'd sacrificed for me, how they'd always believed in me even when I made it difficult, how hurt they were that I hadn't told them about my success, how I owed them honesty and respect. Meredith's was the only one that felt partially human. I don't know what to say. They're furious. Mom won't stop crying. Dad's talking to lawyers. I think you should call them. I didn't call them. Instead, I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Claudia Renz, who'd handled the acquisition paperwork and had seen enough family drama in her career to be unsurprised by all of it. They're claiming the $5,000 was seed funding, she repeated, her tone hovering between disbelief and amusement. That's what they're saying. Do you have documentation of what it actually was? I have the envelope. I have the ticket to Austin they gave me with it. I have witnesses. My sister was there. Perfect. Don't respond to them directly. Forward me all the emails. If they escalate, I'll handle it. They're going to escalate, I said. I know, Claudia replied. People always do when they realize they've lost control of the narrative. She was right. My father sent a formal demand letter 2 days later, claiming that the $5,000 check represented a preliminary investment in TerraSense and demanding a full accounting of the company's financials and his proportional share of the sale. Claudia drafted a response that was so polite it was almost cruel. She outlined the timeline. TerraSense had been operational for over 2 years before my parents gave me the check. The check had been presented alongside a one-way ticket to Austin and explicit instructions to find a real job and stop pursuing the business. There had been no investment agreement, no negotiation of terms, no discussion of equity. The $5,000 was, at best, a gift and more accurately, a severance package designed to remove me from their lives. She included a copy of the country club's private dining room receipt from that day, which I'd requested through a friend who worked there. The memo line my father had written on the check was particularly damning. Fresh Start Funds, she ended with a polite but firm statement that any further harassment would be considered malicious and handled accordingly. I deposited the check the same day. Claudia sent the letter. I labeled it exactly what it was. Severance from a family that had never valued me. My parents didn't respond to Claudia, but they didn't stop trying to reach me either. My mother showed up at the Terrasense office, the small suite we'd been renting in Fresno, only to find it empty. We'd already packed up and transitioned everything to AgriCorp systems. She called my landlord, trying to get information about where I was moving. He told her politely to leave him alone. She reached out to people I'd gone to college with, fishing for details, trying to build a case that I owed them something. It didn't work. The narrative had already been written, and it wasn't theirs. Stanford's Alumni magazine published their feature 2 weeks after Forbes. It included a timeline of Terrasense's growth, quotes from clients whose farms had been transformed by the technology, and a section about overcoming failure that highlighted the Joe Reyes Field disaster and what I'd learned from it. There was a line in the article that my mother would later claim humiliated her. White credits her success not to her privileged background, but to the mentors and colleagues who believed in her work when her own family didn't. It wasn't meant as an attack. It was just the truth, but the truth was damaging enough. The country club crowd my parents cared so much about started talking. I heard about it later, through a cousin who'd always been kind to me, who called to say congratulations and warn me that things were getting ugly. "Your mom's telling people you've been lying about your success for years," she said, "that you manipulated investors and got lucky. Your dad's saying you're ungrateful and that they paid for your education so they deserve credit." "They didn't pay for my education," I said. "I had scholarships and loans." "I know," she said gently. "Everyone knows. That's the problem. They're making themselves look worse every time they talk." I didn't feel bad for them. I felt free. By the time I moved to Chicago, I'd blocked my parents on every platform. I changed my number. I'd made it clear to every mutual connection that I wasn't interested in reconciliation or mediation or whatever performative healing they'd eventually try to suggest. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. AgriCorp set me up in a beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The office was a 15-minute train ride away, and my team, my new, brilliant, passionate team, welcomed me like I'd always belonged there. I started a fund through AgriCorps for students pursuing agricultural technology whose families didn't understand or support their work. It wasn't a big fund, not yet, but it was something. Seed money for people whose seeds had been ignored. I got a dog, a scruffy rescue mutt named Barley who liked to sleep on my feet while I worked. I made friends with my neighbors. I went to farmers markets on Sundays. I video called with Joe Reyes and the rest of my old clients, checking in on how the technology was evolving in the field. I built a life that felt like mine. 6 months after the acquisition, Meredith sent me an email. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something softer than I expected. She said she was sorry for not standing up for me. She said she was proud of me. She said she hoped, someday, I'd be willing to talk to her again. I didn't respond right away. But I didn't delete it either. Some doors, I decided, could stay cracked open. Others needed to be locked for good. My parents never apologized. They never acknowledged what they'd done, and I never gave them the chance. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love. I had something better, a life I'd built with my own hands, a career that mattered, and a community of people who saw me for exactly who I was and valued me because of it. Not in spite of it. They called me the disappointment daughter. They were wrong. I was never the disappointment. I was just the daughter they were too blind to see, and now I didn't need them to. I could see myself just fine.